Your name's James Bond. You've been admiring my form.
With the success of the first 3 James Bond films with Sean Connery, it seemed clear that Eon Productions had a phenomenon on their hands. The next film was going to have an easy time at the box office thanks to Goldfinger being a blockbuster, as people seemed to be salivating for more adventures. And the producer's choice for this 4th outing was a story that seemed destined for movie screens, yet never seemed to escape its legal complications: Thunderball. Thunderball has a fascinating history, both before and after the film's release. This and Casino Royale are the books with the most interesting journeys from page to screen, and we'll tackle a little bit of Royale's journey next time. Many of you likely know that Ian Fleming had always wanted to see his hero make the leap to the big screen. Thunderball was a story that came out of several meetings in 1958 between Fleming, a young Irish producer named Kevin McClory, and a few friends of theirs. Over the next year, there were at least 10 different versions of the story, encompassing outlines, treatments, and scripts. By the fall of 1959, Fleming became disenchanted with the process, and McClory in particular, because of the release of his most recent film. And so McClory brought in a friend named Jack Whittingham to help continue the writing process. Fleming eventually wrote a novel based on these treatments called Thunderball. McClory read an advanced copy of the book and rightly sued Fleming for not acknowledging his and Whittingham's contributions. As a result of this legal action, McClory gained the rights for the screenplay version, as well as any other future filmed versions of the story, and Fleming retained the rights to the novel. Had this suit not happened, Thunderball would have likely been the first James Bond film. With the film rights to the James Bond novels now split between several different parties, Cubby Broccoli and Harry Saltzman were the first ones to get a film out, and thus we have Dr. No. With Thunderball in the hands of Kevin McClory and Casino Royale in the hands of Charles K. Feldman, Eon Productions faced 2 potential rivals at the box office. Originally, Broccoli and Saltzman were pursuing a deal with Feldman to get that book made, but after Fleming's death in 1964, Broccoli and Saltzman also started talking to McClory and were able to come to a deal with him instead of Feldman. Thus, even though early prints of Goldfinger promised that the next film was going to be on Her Majesty's Secret Service, Thunderball preempted that plan, and it now stands as the 4th cinematic Bond adventure. We'll touch on more of the legal troubles and aftermath of this film if we ever get around to talking about the remake, Never Say Never Again. The story is as follows. SPECTRE is on the verge of their biggest scheme yet: hijack 2 atomic warheads and hold the West hostage for $280 million, or £100 million. James Bond is actually at the health clinic near the airbase where the bombs are stationed at, and finds the body of a Major Derval the night of the theft. In the briefing the next day at MI6, Bond notes that Major Derval is part of the flight crew carrying the bombs, despite the fact that Bond found the corpse before the theft. He asks M to allow him to pursue Derval's sister, Domino, as part of his investigation. Domino is currently in Nassau and is a ward to Emilio Largo, the man overseeing the SPECTRE operation. Bond now has less than 4 days to find the bombs and stop SPECTRE. The SPECTRE plot has since become a template plan for various other adventures and spy spoofs, but I think it's a solid enough scheme for an early Bond adventure. It provides some great tension for the film, and it's easy to understand. This film has been criticized for a few things related to this plot. It takes too long to get going, and a lot of the action is underwater, which slows that action down and robs some of the excitement. I won't disagree with these points entirely. I think they're valid complaints. I'm tackling them together because I think both are casualties of the same problem: length. The theft feels like it's showing us every step of the scheme, regardless of how important it is to see each stage, and the underwater scenes sometimes have prolonged shots or even sometimes unnecessary insert shots of aquatic life. I think the solution is obvious: conciseness. For example, instead of showing bits like covering the Vulcan with the net, have Largo sum up those parts in his phone report to Blofeld. I feel like the audience would be smart enough to connect the dots and understand certain things like the bombs have been taken from the plane without actually showing that bit. As for the other underwater sequences, I have mixed feelings. Bits like the final battle at Miami feel like they go on a bit too long, and yet moments like Bond fighting the guy outside the Disco Volante and Bond being discovered by Largo at the bomb site are perfectly fine. A lot of that may be the music playing behind it, but I just wanted to point out that I don't think the fact that a lot of the action is underwater is a mistake. I think it's just a pacing and editing problem. Later films like The Spy Who Loved Me and License to Kill prove that underwater sequences can be done just as well as any other kind of action sequence. So I don't think McClory's weird fascination with aquatic scenes is necessarily the problem. Beyond the underwater bits, I just have a great time watching this film. I've described Thunderball in the past as feeling like we get to go on vacation with Bond, and I stand by that. There's just something about the Bahamas that screams luxury and fun, which are definitely part of the Bond cocktail. It's beautifully photographed in a widescreen 2:35:1 ratio, the first for the series, by the way. And since my initial viewing of the film, I've always wanted to travel there. I think the series has a similar attitude to the location that I do, since it's revisited the Bahamas several times, both as a practical shooting location and as an actual location in a story. Casino Royale in 2006 even has Bond in similar settings, and I think that's a testament to how much Bond is identified with the place. The music helps to cement this idea of going on vacation. John Barry's score exudes that same elegance with all the style of 007 himself. This, along with some of the pieces from Diamonds Are Forever, is what I would imagine the classic Bond's world would sound like if there was an actual orchestra playing in the background. The title track is a step up from Goldfinger's offering. Now, not to crap on that song, I think it's a great song actually, but Thunderball feels like it's a better fit for Connery's interpretation of the character. It's a little more dark and dangerous. Because the film's post-production was insanely short, the song was not available for Barry to use throughout much of the scoring process, and so we have Mr. Kiss Kiss Bang Bang as our main tune for much of the major sequences. I really love this song as well, and I think it would have been a fine tune to carry the entirety of the score if we didn't have Tom Jones's offering. Much like some of the later films, Thunderball is a film that has two main songs that both would have served as excellent title songs, and I'm so happy I live in a world where the film has both. The performances from the cast are generally solid. Sean Connery started to get a bit bored and frustrated both by the insane publicity and the lack of complexity of Bond's character by this point, but thankfully I think he's able to put these problems aside and give us one more solid performance as Bond. My favorite bit with him is when he and Largo do some skeet shooting. The way he just casually shoots the target out of the air is so friggin' cool and hilarious in equal measure that I can't help but love it. In fact, this might be my single favorite Connery moment in any of the films. I've already raved about Domino in the past, so I'll just sum up my opinions here. She's a great layered character. A kept woman who's resigned to her lot in life, that becomes intrigued by all that Bond has to offer, and her desire for revenge against Largo for killing her brother adds a much-needed edge to that character. I love all of her scenes, but my favorite is when she kills Largo. Director Terrence Young was smart not to cut to Largo's reaction, as it seems to give that moment more significance for Domino as a character, and I think it's more powerful. Emilio Largo is a fine villain who's supposed to be a mirror for Bond, and I love the comparison-contrast that's done between them. However, I feel like the series has offered us better examples of how to do the darker side of Bond character, like Red Grant, Franz Sanchez, Alec Trevelyan, and Le Chiffre. And thus Largo loses a bit of that fascination he might have had with me at the time. I do like some of the unique things he brings to the table, like his ruthless streak and his treatment of Domino, but I struggle to find too many other reasons to bump him higher in my rankings. The best villain in this film is Fiona Volpe. She is just so much fun. She's got both the sexuality and the deviousness that I want from my femme fatales. Much like her namesake, her wily nature makes it a treat to pit her against a predator like Bond. She is a deliberate response to characters like Tatiana Romanova and Pussy Galore who were won over to Bond's side, and her dialogue during the scene where Bond is captured is my second favorite bit of the film. Although I also love the earlier gag with her in the tub and Bond handing her shoes to put on. The main issue this film has with its characters is in its overabundance of side characters. So many minor parts are given names and are built up to be important parts of the villain's organization, and yet I struggle to remember most of them once the film is over. The bad guys have Vargas, Quist, Yanni, Kutz, Count Lippi, and Angelo, though I do tend to remember Lippi and Angelo more because they have larger parts towards the beginning. The one thing Vargas gets is a cool death, and that's about it. The film even comments on the lack of memorability of some of these characters when Largo asks, "What do you do, Vargas?" My answer, get a life. The good guys don't fare much better. I do like bringing Felix Leiter back, and I do appreciate that this film is trying to treat this mission as an all-hands-on-deck affair, so it makes sense that Bond has some other allies palling around with him. Yet Pinder is someone I forget about when the film is over, and right now, I don't recall there being an analogous version of him in Never Say Never Again. Paula fares a little better, but it feels like she's just here to be kidnapped and killed, so I don't really get the point of her prominence in the film, beyond the obvious marketing move to try to get as many Bond girls in this outing as possible. Speaking of Bond women, Patricia Fairing is a pretty memorable secondary character. I think it's mostly because of Bond blackmailing her into sex. While this probably should present a problem for me like the barn scene in Goldfinger, I'm actually okay with this one, mostly because it's much clearer that Pat is as into the idea as Bond is, and so it comes off as playful banter. I don't think Bond would have actually made her lose her job if she refused to have sex with him. I think it's just part of the game. And besides, it's totally within Bond's character to shag his way into a clean bill of health, and he's done this several times. Most notably in GoldenEye with Caroline, Dr. Molly Warmflash in The World Is Not Enough, and with the other version of Patricia Fairing in Never Say Never Again. Let's touch on some production points. I love the idea of bringing back Terrence Young for this outing, but there's something about this film that feels closer in spirit to Goldfinger than something like From Russia with Love. I think it's specifically because Young wants to upstage Guy Hamilton, and he's admitted to as such in interviews. I credit Terrence Young a lot in establishing the basic building blocks of a Bond film, and I think this is a fine film for him to exit on. Ken Adam once again does fine work, particularly with the underwater craft and the SPECTRE meeting room, but that is to be expected by now. If you can, I'd highly recommend watching the film with the commentaries on. In preparation for the Special Edition and Ultimate Edition DVD releases of the series, John Cork put together some fabulous bonus material. Thunderball specifically has 2 commentaries, and one of them highlighted Ken Adams' design work. If you look at the 2 briefing room scenes, there are a number of wonderful details that invite comparison. For example, both Bond and Largo are the last ones to enter the room, and will be the focal points of our story. Both of the rooms have large maps with areas highlighted. MI6's room has a high ceiling and uses a very warm color palette, representing the just side of the law. Spectre has a very low ceiling and uses dark and cold colors representing the cloistered nature of Spectre and the villainy inherent within. Having taught design work at a few universities myself, those are the kinds of details that, if a student came to me with those ideas in mind, would make me beam with pride. The title sequence is my favorite in all of the Connery films. Maurice Binder returns after a 2-film absence, and much like Young wanting to upstage Hamilton in directing, I think Binder wants to top Brown John's work, and I think he succeeds. Everything traditional we love about Bond sequences can be traced back to this film, and I love a lot of the specific imagery. Women swimming, villains shooting harpoons, the specific color palette, it's all great stuff. The pre-title sequence is a terrific follow-up to Goldfinger's standout template. The jetpack does feel a little out of place, but it's worth it for how cool it is. I also adore the fight scene with Bob Simmons, and he finally gets to play a named character. I also love the gag of Bond punching a widow, though I think his discovery of Bouvard's deception at the funeral is pretty weak. The film also relies a bit too much on coincidence in its plotting for its own good. Bond just happens to be at the same health clinic that SPECTRE is using as part of their plot. Fiona Volpe just happens to be the one that picks up Bond on the side of the road. A shark just happens to escape the net of the Vulcan plane at the same time that Bond is checking it out so he can get inside. You see what I mean? There are also a few odd moments here and there. During the Q briefing, Q specifically states that the watch has the Geiger counter. Yet Bond gives Domino the camera saying it also has a counter. I suppose they both could have had it, but I wish it was mentioned during that earlier scene. As Largo and Domino are leaving the casino, Leiter and Bond are seen chatting with each other in the background. Yet Leiter enters Bond's hotel room and treats it like it's the first time they're meeting up. There's a guy that comes into the final fight with Bond and Largo, and he's holding a plate of champagne. What? Largo and crew were going to celebrate getting away from the Navy before they fully managed to do that? Also, how does this guy not hear or see the ruckus going on upstairs? There are also some clear smudges on the camera lens during the skeet shooting scene with Volpe and Largo on the Blu-ray transfer I watched in preparation for this review. This is one of the only times I've noticed something like that I feel like could have been fixed during the Lowry restoration project in the mid-2000s. Is this the only official film since Dr. No that doesn't include some version of the phrase, James Bond will return? Finally, I want to comment on the humor. Connery's films have always had their sense of humor, but I think this film has the best collection of jokes and gags. I've already mentioned a few of them so far, but just watch Connery giving his one-liners in this one, and I think you'll see what I mean. Thunderball oozes style for me. While the previous three films are all better in my eyes, this is the film that comes to mind when I think of Sean Connery at the height of his popularity. It has stunning locations, great design work, fabulous Bond women, a devious Spectre plan, and a fantastic score. I can understand where detractors of this film are coming from, but I can't say I agree that these problems outweigh the good. Thunderball did indeed take advantage of the hype built by the previous films. Before Skyfall, this was the highest grossing film of the series, adjusted for inflation, of course. Despite its popularity, this film caused a fair amount of problems for the series to follow. Connery started to rethink his commitment to the series, and this would not be the last we'll see of McClory's insistence in getting involved in the James Bond films. The shadow the first four Connery films cast on cinema in general was quite large at the time, and plenty of other studios looked for some way to get in on that trend, and we'll take a look at one of these efforts to cash in on the spy craze next time.